Welcome to the fourth part of preparing for the ACT 2021-2022, the math section. If there's a certain problem you want to see worked down, look at the description and you'll have the timestamps for all the problems so you can just jump immediately to the problem that you want to see. So starting with 48, this is a three-part problem where we all have to look at this graph and use them in 48, 49, and 50. So it says the quadratic function, that's this upside down parabola, and this triangle are graphed. And they give us the coordinates for points M, N, and P. Now number 48 says, in terms of A and B, what is the area in square units of the triangle? So the area formula for a triangle is 1/2 the base times the height. Now for this triangle, what is the height? The height is this, which is 5b. And what is the base? Well, it goes from here to here. And that is 4a. So we're putting that in terms of a and b. So now we can apply that to our area formula. Base is 4a, the height is 5b, and so what we have is we have 10ab. And so our answer is letter G. Number 49, it says point M will remain fixed and Q will move to the right along the x-axis. As Q continues to move, which of the following statements best describes what will happen to the slope of MQ? So we have to imagine, let's erase this, that point Q is now over here. And there's our line. And then let's do it again over here. And let's do it way over here. Whoops, wrong color. So we want to look at the slopes of these lines because that's what's being asked of us. So the slope of this line starts here, it's negative. Now here in red, here in blue, and here in green, it is still negative, but is becoming closer and closer to horizontal, meaning it's closer and closer to 0. Now the point Q is always going to be lower than M, which means the line is always going to be going down, even as it flattens out. So that tells us something. That means it is getting closer to 0, but it will never be positive. Now this one will mess with students because they say, how is it increasing? Well, over here it is more negative. And over here on the right it is less negative. And so when you go from more negative to less negative, that's an increase. It's kind of like saying, I owed $1,000 and now I only owe $100. Well, that's an increase for me. Yes, I still owe something. Yes, I still have a debt, but it's less. And so that's what we're saying when we go from more negative, a steep slope, to less negative. So that's why the answer is letter D. Number 50, which of the following values is equal to f of 5a? So what we're doing is we are looking at the parabola because that is the function f. And so the question is, what is it doing to 5a? So 5a is right here. So I trace it up to this point on the graph, and then I see, okay, what y value does it give me? It gives me 8b. So there is the reason why letter K is the answer for this problem. Number 51. 12 jurors are needed for an upcoming trial. The diagram below illustrates a part of the process. The 12 jurors will be selected from a jury pool of about 60 people. The court records show the trend that only 40% of the people who are summoned actually appear, and that of the people who appear, 1/3 are excused. If this same trend continues, how many people should be summoned to have as close to as possible to 60 people in the jury pool? So it says a jury pool of about 60 people. That means this number should be 60. Now, it says of those who appear, 1/3 are excused. And 2/3, that means 2/3 are in the jury pool. So if the jury pool is 2/3, and that's 60 people, then the excuse should be half of that, should be 1/3. So we've got 30. So that means the number of people who appeared was 90. Now, it then says that 40% of the people who are summoned actually appear. So this is 40%, and this is 60%. Now, what we're trying to get to is we're trying to get to this number right here. Now, if we knew it, we could just multiply it by 40% and get 90, but we have to work backwards. So instead, we're going to take 90 and divide by 40%, or in this case, we're going to divide by 0.4. And what we get is we get 225 people. So that is the number of people we need to summon in order to get a jury pool of 60. So we're actually working our way backwards from the bottom all the way up to the top. 52. What is the 275th digit after the decimal point in the repeating decimal 6295? Because it's what's actually happening is 6295, 6295, 6295, and so on and so on. Now, what's happening is it's repeating in these cycles of 4. So the question is, how many of these cycles are there? So we're going to take 275 and divide by 4. And what that gives us is 68.75. Now we can also write that as a mixed number. So it's going to go through 68 cycles and then 3/4 of a cycle. And that 3/4 tells us, okay, this is the first number in the cycle, this is the second, this is the third, this is the fourth. And then it repeats 1, 2, 3, 4, and then cycles again 1, 2, 3, 4. And this 3/4, it tells us that we're going to stop at the third out of the 4. So that's why the answer is letter K, because 9 is the third number in the cycle. And that's what this remainder of 3/4, that's what it tells us. 53. It says, given that these two functions, f of x is x squared minus 4, and g of x is x plus 3. What are the values for which f of g of x is 0? So we want to know what is x, so that when we add 3 and then square it and subtract 4, we get 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to work backwards. We're going to say f of x, which is x squared minus 4, that equals 0. So when I solve for that, we get x equals plus or minus 2. So then we've got g of x equals x plus 3 equals 2. G of x equals x plus 3. It also equals negative 2. So when I subtract 3, what we end up with is x equals negative 1 and x equals negative 5. The other thing you could have done is, since you have these answers to choose from, you could just pick an answer and pick a number and plug it in and see if it gives you 0. And if it did, well, then you know it had to work, and if you knew it didn't, then you knew you could scratch it off. So for example, I could try 1. 1 plus 3 is 4, and then I plug it into the F formula, 4 squared is 16 minus 4. Well, that doesn't give me 0. So that means I know letter D and letter C don't work because they both contain a 1. So next, I could try a 2. So over here, 2 plus 3 is 5. 5 squared is 25 minus 4. Well, that doesn't work. Well, what about negative 1? If I take negative 1 plus 3 is 2. 2 squared is 4, minus 4 is 0. There we go. And the only answer with a negative 1 left is letter A. 54. Given that p is a positive number, n is a negative number, and that the absolute value of p is greater than the absolute value of n, which of the following expressions has the greatest value? Often what I tell students is find a set of numbers that works. So if I said something like 4 and negative 10, that does not fit the criteria. Because if I took the absolute values, the absolute value of n would be bigger. We don't want that. Likewise, if I said 7 and 0, that also wouldn't work. Because n has to be a negative number. But if I did 3 and negative 2, this one indeed works. Because the absolute value of each of these for p is actually bigger. So now the question is, well, if I plug these numbers in, which of these expressions ends up giving the largest number? And as it turns out, letter G is the expression that turns out to be the biggest. Now, this is not the only set of numbers that this works for. There's a whole slew of numbers. Just as long as the absolute value of the positive number is bigger than the negative number, you can come up with a whole bunch of different numbers, not just the ones that I came up with. I prefer to keep the numbers close to 0 because that makes the numbers more manageable. So now, number 55. Here, the thing to remember is that they tell you that I equals the square root of negative 1. That means I squared is negative 1. So right off the bat, that's negative 1. Now over here, we've got I cubed. Well, that's the same as I times I squared, which is negative I. I to the fourth, well, that's I squared times I squared, which is negative 1 times negative 1, which is 1. And then finally, I to the fifth, well, that's I times I to the fourth. But what did we just find right here in green? That I to the fourth is 1. So I to the fifth can be replaced with a 1. So doing all this, I've got I plus negative 1 plus negative I all over. I cubed is still negative I plus 1 plus I. So what ends up happening is on the top and on the bottom, the i's cancel out. And you're left with negative 1. 56. So which of the following graphs is the solution set to this shown? The thing to remember is that this is a line. And so that means this has to be the circle. Now with a line, when it's written in standard form, what I will tell people is find the intercepts of x plus 2y less than or equal to 6. Because that's going to clue you in about the line and what shape it will have. And so what you do is you cover up either the x or the y. And so if I cover up the y, that means x equals 6. And then if I cover up the x, I get y equals 3. So I'm looking for a line that has both a positive x and a positive y intercept. Well, J doesn't work. All the others work. Now, we also know about the line that it's less than or equal to, meaning that it should be solid, which means we can cross off letter G. So now we're down to F, we're down to K, and we're down to H. So the question is, well, what did we say the intercept was? So for y, it was 3. For x, it was 6. So we've got 3, and we've got 6. Then we've got 3, and then we've got 6. Now it also says it is less than 6. And one quick test that I do is I ask, okay, should it be above the line or below the line? How do I know? Well, plug in 0, 0. It's the easiest number, it's the easiest point to plug in, and it's the easiest way to test. If x is 0 and y is 0, is that less than 6? Yes. Which means, should it be shading above or below? Well, it should be shading in the direction of the origin, which is below. Which means we can cross off letter H. So now the difference is, well, how big should this circle be? So for the circle, I've got 3x squared greater than 12 minus 3y squared. Let's move this over. Plus 3y squared less than 12. And if I divide everything by 3, I get x squared plus y squared less than 4. And if you recall back in the video with part 3, we talked about the equation of a circle. X squared plus y squared, if it's just centered at the origin, it's just x squared plus y squared equals r squared. So the radius should be 2. Now, letter F, is the radius 2? Well, no, it doesn't make sense because if it starts here at the origin, it's gone past 3. That's too big. So that's why letter K is the answer, because the radius starts at the origin and it shouldn't go past 3. All right. 57. A, B, C, and D are real numbers. Now they tell us that A times C is 1, so that means, okay, those are reciprocals. B plus C over D is undefined, and A plus AB, C equals D. So which of the following must be true? Now they say that AC is 1. Well, I have AC right here, so that means B equals D. Now they also say over here that this is undefined. Well, the only reason you could be undefined is if D equals 0. Now if D equals 0, and B equals D, then that means B must also equal 0. So that's why the answer is letter D. 58. Here we've got this cosine graph. And the question is, which of the following equations represents this? Now the first thing to note is the amplitude. For cosine, it's normally 1, but in this case, it is 3. And so anyone who's ever seen amplitude knows that that's the number out in front. So that means F and G have to go. So then the question is, what is the period length? How long does it take to go from one point to that same point? And the period is pi. So now we ask ourselves, okay, so what is the number inside? Well, it's always 2 pi divided by that number, which is 2. So that's why your answer is letter K. 59. Here we've got this picture of a kite being flown. It forms a 75-degree angle with the ground. At the same moment, an angle of elevation is 45 degrees. The question is, what is the length of the string? So this is what we want to find. Now, we have a triangle, and we know 2 angles, which means we can quickly figure out the third angle by subtracting away 75 and 45. And what we get is we get 60. So the question is, how do we figure out the length of this string? Well, this is a law of sines type question because this is not a right triangle. And sine, cosine, and tangent, they apply when you have a right angle, which we don't have. So to solve this, what we would do is we would say sine of 60 degrees over 240 equals sine of 45 degrees over s for string. Now again, if you haven't seen this in a pre-calc class or maybe in an Honors Algebra 2 class, don't worry about it. Now this is nothing more than a proportion that we can cross multiply and divide. S equals 240 sine of 45 degrees over sine of 60. Now here you want to be clear about what mode you're in. Because our angles are in degrees, you want to be in degree mode in your calculator. Otherwise you will get a wrong answer. So as a decimal, we get 195.959. So that's clearly not any of these. So quickly, I'll do 60 square root of 3, and that's 103. Nope. 80 square root of 3, and we get, 80 square root of 6, excuse me. There's 159.959. There is our answer. And then finally, number 60. A publisher charges $15 for the first copy of a book and $12 for each additional copy. What represents the cost of Y number of books? All right. So if there's one book, the cost is 15. If there are two, well, it goes up by 12. So that means we go up to 27. 3, we go up 12 more, and we get 39. Now what I often tell people is, well, just plug in 1 and see which formulas give you 15. Well, this one doesn't. This one doesn't. This one doesn't. And this one doesn't. It's only letter F. Because one copy should only cost you 15. Not 12, not 18, and not 27. So by elimination, for number 60, letter F is the answer. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out all the other videos that talk about all the other sections, English, reading, and science, for this preparing for the ACT. Good luck and happy preparation.